a bag of sugar, a stick of butter, and a nickel's worth of vanilla. In 1955, that was enough to fill every candy dish on the block, and the woman who made it never opened a cookbook. Number 15 on this list crackles and shatters like glass, and you can make it with 3 ingredients. And number 2 starts with something most people would never put near a candy dish, a raw potato. These were the sweets that disappeared when convenience took over the American kitchen. Here are 30 easy homemade candies from the 1950s no one makes anymore. Number 30. Chocolate fudge. This was the candy every girl learned to make before she learned to drive. Sugar, cocoa, butter, milk, and a splash of vanilla. You boiled it low and slow, stirred it steady, and poured it into a buttered dish when it reached the soft ball stage. The trick was knowing when to stop stirring. Too early, and it stayed runny. Too late, and it seized into a grainy block. But when you got it right, it set into a slab so smooth you could nearly see your reflection. Church bake sales sold it by the square on wax paper. Neighbors traded recipes that differed by 1 tablespoon of butter and swore theirs was the real one. Nobody bought fudge in a box. You made it, or somebody who cared about you made it for you. Number 29. Cream cheese mince. Cream cheese, powdered sugar, and a drop of peppermint oil. You mixed the dough by hand until it was smooth enough to press into small rubber molds shaped like roses, leaves, and bells. Each mint came out soft, pale, and light enough to dissolve on contact with your tongue. Bridal showers, baby showers, church receptions, every white tablecloth in the 1950s had a plate of these next to the punch bowl. The cream cheese gave them a tang that plain sugar mints never had, and pastel food coloring made them look like porcelain buttons lined up in rows. Women kept their mint molds in kitchen drawers for decades, pulling them out whenever someone in the family got married or the church ladies needed a tray for Sunday fellowship. You could press out 100 in half an hour. No cooking, no thermometer, no cleanup worth mentioning. They melted on the tongue before you finished chewing, and every woman at the table asked for the recipe even though she already had it. Before I go any further, for the folks who love making old recipes like these from scratch, I put together a collection of recipes like these in one place. It is called the Vintage Recipe Guide, and you can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not mention it again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Number 28, coconut bonbons, shredded coconut, powdered sugar, sweetened condensed milk, and a few drops of almond extract. You mixed the filling, rolled it into small balls, and set them on wax paper in the refrigerator until they firmed up. Then you dipped each one in melted chocolate with a fork, one at a time. The whole process took an afternoon. The filling was sweet enough to make your teeth ache, and the chocolate shell cracked clean when you bit through it. Women made trays of these for Christmas. Tin boxes lined with wax paper went from kitchen to kitchen through the holidays. They looked like something from a candy shop window, but they cost almost nothing, and every bite was better than store-bought. Number 27, Panouche. Fudge made with brown sugar instead of cocoa, and it tasted like a praline married a caramel. Brown sugar, butter, milk, vanilla. You cooked it to soft ball, beat it until it thickened, and poured it into a pan. The name came from a Mexican-Spanish word for raw sugar. In New England, Panouche was the fudge people made when they wanted something other than chocolate. It had a deep, almost smoky sweetness that regular fudge could never reach. Some women dropped walnuts into the batch right before pouring. Others let it set plain and cut it into squares. It kept well in a tin, which made it a favorite for mailing to relatives who lived too far to visit. Number 26, candied apples. A wooden stick, a firm apple, and a pot of boiling red sugar. You dipped the apple, turned it twice, and set it on greased parchment to cool. The shell hardened in minutes. County fairs sold them on every corner, but the homemade ones tasted different. You could taste the apple through the sugar because the coating was thinner, not the inch-thick armor the fairground version came wrapped in. Kids ate them on the porch because mothers refused to let red sugar near the carpet. The juice ran down your chin and the shell cracked against your teeth, and you kept going anyway. By the early 1960s, commercially made versions started appearing in grocery stores sealed in plastic, and the kitchen counter version slowly disappeared. Number 25. Butterscotch Drops. Brown sugar, butter, a splash of vinegar, and just enough water to dissolve it all. You stirred the pot over medium heat until the mixture hit hard crack, then dropped spoonfuls onto a greased baking sheet and stepped back. Each one cooled into a small golden disc that cracked clean between your teeth. The vinegar cut through the sweetness and gave every piece a sharp little edge underneath all that butter. Some women scored the drops while they were still warm, so they snapped into even pieces. Others let the spoon decide the shape and never thought twice about it. These were the candies that lived at the bottom of your grandmother's handbag, each one wrapped in cellophane that fused to the surface, no matter how carefully she twisted the ends. Nobody bought them at a store. They came from the kitchen, they tasted like the kitchen, and everybody just called them butterscotch. A kitchen in the 1950s became a candy factory every December. The same woman who fried chicken on Sunday was pulling taffy on Tuesday and dipping bonbons on Thursday. She never bought a single piece of candy for the holiday tins she packed and delivered to every neighbor, every teacher, every church secretary on the list. The candy you gave to people you cared about came from your own stove. It cost almost nothing except time, and time was the one thing she gave without counting. Number 24, rum balls. Crushed vanilla wafers, powdered sugar, cocoa, corn syrup, and rum. No baking required. You mixed everything in a bowl, rolled the mixture into small balls, and coated them in powdered sugar or cocoa. They sat in a tin for a day or two, and the flavor deepened every hour. These showed up at every holiday party next to the divinity and the fudge, and they were always the first to go. The rum was never subtle. You could smell it the moment the lid came off. Children were told to stay away from the plate, which only made them more determined. Some women used bourbon instead. Others swore by brandy. The debate never settled because every version worked and nobody was wrong. Number 23, old-fashioned caramels. Sugar, cream, butter, corn syrup, and vanilla. You cooked the batch to firm ball, poured it into a buttered pan, let it cool for an hour, and cut it into squares with a greased knife. Each piece got wrapped in wax paper with a twist at both ends. The wrapping took longer than the cooking. A single batch produced dozens of caramels, and every one of them needed its own paper jacket or the whole lot fused into a single amber slab by morning. The best caramels had a chew that lasted. Not jawbreaker hard, not taffy soft, but somewhere right between where your teeth sank in slowly and the butter flavor rose up to meet them. Women made these in November and stored them in tins through December for gift boxes. They traveled well, kept their shape in the mail, and nobody ever returned a holiday box that had any caramels left inside. Number 22, divinity. Sugar, corn syrup, water, and 2 egg whites beaten to stiff peaks. You boiled the sugar mixture to hardball, poured it in a thin stream into the egg whites while the mixer ran, and watched it transform into a candy so white and so light it looked like a cloud pressed into shape on a plate. Divinity was the most temperamental candy in the American kitchen. Humidity killed it. If the air was damp, the candy refused to set. Women in the South checked the weather before starting a batch, and on rainy days they made something else entirely. There was no saving a failed batch. It either worked or you threw the whole bowl out and tried again the following week. A divinity without a pecan half sitting on top was considered unfinished, like a letter without a signature. Church women across the Deep South made hundreds of pieces every Christmas, lined up on wax paper across every flat surface in the house. The best divinity had a texture between marshmallow and meringue, dry on the outside and slightly chewy at the center. When divinity was right, nothing else on the candy plate mattered. Number 21, molasses taffy. Molasses, sugar, butter, and a pinch of baking soda. You boiled it all together until it reached the right pull, buttered your hands, and started stretching. 2 people stood across the kitchen pulling the rope of candy between them, folding it back, pulling again, over and over until the dark syrup turned pale gold and the texture went from sticky to smooth. The whole point was the pulling, Families made an evening of it. Neighbors came over. Kids took turns until their arms gave out. When the taffy was ready, you twisted it into a long rope, snipped it with scissors into bite-sized pieces, and wrapped each one in wax paper. The finished candy was chewy without being tough, and the molasses gave it a deep, burnt sugar flavor that plain taffy could never touch. Nobody bought molasses taffy at a store. You made it with the people you liked, and that was half the reason it tasted the way it did. Number 20. Horehound drops. Dried horehound leaves steeped in boiling water until the liquid turned dark, then strained and mixed with sugar and a little corn syrup. You boiled the whole thing to hard crack, poured it onto a greased slab, and scored it into small squares before it set. The flavor hit you sideways. Bitter and earthy at the front, sweet at the finish, and something almost medicinal underneath that you could not quite name. Horehound grew wild across most of the country, along fence rows and in neglected yards, and people had been boiling it into candy for longer than anyone alive could remember. Grandmothers kept a jar on the kitchen counter and handed one to any child with a cough or a sore throat, no doctor required. The bitterness was the whole point. It was supposed to taste like that. You learned to like it, or you left it alone, and most people who grew up with it never stopped reaching for one. Drugstores carried commercial horehound drops well into the 1960s, but the homemade version was darker, rougher, and stronger. It tasted like the yard it came from. Number 19. Sugared almonds. Whole almonds, sugar, water, and a drop of vanilla. You boiled sugar and water into a thick syrup, stirred in the almonds, and kept stirring over heat until the syrup crystallized around each nut in a white crust. The pan hissed, and the sugar seized into chalky clumps before it melted again into a glossy shell. Getting through that ugly stage without burning the batch took steady heat and a strong arm that did not stop moving. The finished almonds came out coated in a thin, crackly layer of caramelized sugar that shattered between your molars. Wedding guests in the 1950s found 5 of these wrapped in tulle at every place setting. Italian families called them confetti and gave them at christenings, graduations, and engagements. The homemade ones had a rougher coat and a deeper caramel flavor than the factory version, and that roughness was how you knew someone stood over a hot stove and made them. The candy thermometer gave numbers to knowledge that already lived in a woman's hands. Before the thermometer, you tested candy by dropping a bead of hot sugar into cold water and feeling the result with your fingers. Softball, firm ball, hard crack. These were not stages you read about in a book. They were stages you felt. Your mother knew the difference the way a musician knows a wrong note, and even after the thermometer arrived on the kitchen wall, plenty of women never used one. They dropped, they pinched, they listened to the boil. The science was already in their hands before the instrument gave it a number. Number 18. Vinegar taffy. Sugar, butter, and plain white vinegar. You boiled the mixture, poured it on a greased surface, and pulled it when it was cool enough to handle. The vinegar gave the taffy a tartness that straight sugar candy could never match. Sharp on the tongue, sweet at the back, and children either loved it or refused a second piece. This was Depression-era candy that survived into the 1950s because the ingredients cost next to nothing. Even when budgets grew, some families kept making it out of habit. The taste carried a memory forward. It reminded people of a time when sugar and vinegar were treated like something precious, and turning them into candy was a small celebration, not a hobby. Number 17. Hard cinnamon discs. Sugar, corn syrup, water, cinnamon oil, and red food coloring. You boiled the sugar to hard crack, stirred in enough cinnamon oil to make your eyes sting, and dropped spoonfuls onto a greased surface. Each spoonful spread into a small red disc that cooled hard in under a minute. The cinnamon hit first. Not the gentle warmth of a cinnamon roll, but the sharp, concentrated heat of pure cinnamon oil straight from the bottle. These were hot candy, and the people who loved them treated every other cinnamon-flavored thing in the store as a pale imitation. You sucked on one for 20 minutes, and your tongue burned for 20 more. Grandmothers dropped them into glass jars and set the jars on kitchen shelves where the red caught the afternoon light. They were the homemade answer to Red Hots, except they were bigger, fiercer, and they never came out of a cellophane bag. Number 16. Maple cream candy. Pure maple syrup boiled to soft ball, cooled to lukewarm, and stirred until it turned pale and thick. Then you poured it into molds and let it set. The result tasted like maple syrup concentrated into a solid block. No added sugar, no butter, just syrup. In Vermont and upstate New York, these were made fresh during sugaring season and sold at roadside stands along the highway. The homemade version was softer than the commercial kind, almost crumbly at the edges, and it dissolved on your tongue instead of requiring a chew. Getting it right came down to temperature. Pour too hot, and it stayed liquid. Pour too cold, and it set up in the pot before it reached the mold. Number 15. Sponge candy. Sugar, corn syrup, and baking soda. You boiled the sugar and syrup to hard crack, stirred in the baking soda, and the whole pot erupted into a foaming, golden mass twice its original size. The baking soda released gas into the molten sugar, and when it cooled, the candy was riddled with tiny air pockets that gave it a honeycomb structure so delicate it shattered at the first bite. Some called it honeycomb toffee. Others called it cinder toffee or fairy food. In Buffalo, New York, they called it sponge candy and dipped the pieces in chocolate. But before it became a regional specialty, it was a kitchen experiment any child could pull off with 3 ingredients in a pot. 1 second, you had bubbling amber liquid. The next second, the pot was overflowing with golden foam. You broke the cooled sponge into rough pieces, dipped each one in melted chocolate, and set them on wax paper. The contrast between the crisp, airy interior and the smooth shell made it the most interesting texture on any candy plate. Sponge candy keeps poorly, though. Humidity softens the honeycomb within a day, and the crackle turns to chew. That is why it was always made fresh and eaten fast. Number 14. Chocolate-covered cherries. A maraschino cherry wrapped in fondant, dipped in chocolate. The fondant liquefied inside the shell over 2 or 3 days, and when you bit through the chocolate, the cherry was floating in sweet syrup inside a little dome. Making them was tedious. You drained the cherries, patted them dry, wrapped each one in a disc of fondant by hand, chilled them, then dipped them in tempered chocolate one at a time. If the coating cracked before the fondant dissolved, the filling leaked and the whole tray stuck together. A box of homemade chocolate-covered cherries was the kind of gift that meant someone spent an entire afternoon thinking about you. Number 13. Seafoam candy. Brown sugar, corn syrup, water, and an egg white. You boiled the sugar, beat the egg white stiff, and poured the hot syrup into it while stirring hard. The result looked like Divinity's darker, chewier cousin. Seafoam had a caramel depth that white Divinity could never reach because the brown sugar brought molasses into the picture. It pulled apart in soft layers and dissolved slowly on the tongue. In the Midwest, seafoam was the candy women made when Divinity felt too risky. Same technique, fewer complaints about the weather, and the brown sugar forgave imprecise timing in ways white sugar refused to. Some added vanilla. Others pressed chopped pecans into the top before it cooled. Never the fanciest candy on the plate, but usually the one people reached for twice. When wrapped candy bars dropped below a dime and every drugstore had a spinning rack by the register, homemade candy did not vanish overnight. It just stopped being necessary. Convenience won the way it always wins, not by being better, but by being there when nobody felt like standing over a hot stove. And somewhere in that trade, an entire vocabulary left the kitchen. Soft ball, hard crack, thread stage. The women who spoke that language are mostly gone now. The stoves still work. The sugar is still on the shelf. The knowledge is the part that walked away. Number 12. Fondant creams. Sugar, water, and corn syrup cooked to soft ball, poured onto a marble slab, and worked with a spatula until it turned white and smooth. From there, you flavored it with anything you wanted: peppermint, lemon, orange, raspberry. You shaped it into small discs, let them dry, then dipped them in chocolate or left them bare. Fondant creams looked professional. Set them on a plate and nobody believed you made them at home. The texture was firm on the outside, creamy and nearly liquid at the center. Making the fondant base was the real labor. Once you had a good batch, shaping and dipping became the easy part. Number 11. Peppermint patties. Powdered sugar, sweetened condensed milk, peppermint extract, and a bar of chocolate for dipping. You mixed the filling, rolled it into balls, pressed each one flat, froze them on a cookie sheet, and dipped them in melted chocolate. The cold filling kept the chocolate from sliding off. The whole process was simple enough for a child to handle, and most children did handle it, because licking peppermint fondant off your fingers was half the point. The homemade version was softer and sweeter than the store-bought kind, and the chocolate was never as smooth, but nobody cared. A slightly uneven peppermint patty from your own kitchen outperformed a perfect one from a wrapper every time. Number 10. Pralines. Brown sugar, white sugar, butter, cream, vanilla, and pecans. Lots of pecans. You cooked the sugars and cream to soft ball, stirred in butter and vanilla, beat the mixture until it lost its shine, folded in the pecans, and dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper. Each one spread into a rough disc with pecan halves pushing through the surface. In New Orleans, pralines were never a holiday candy. They were year-round. Women sold them from baskets in the French Quarter, wrapped in wax paper, still warm. The Creole version originally used white sugar and almonds, brought from France. The Southern version swapped in pecans and brown sugar, and that is the praline most Americans know today. Getting the texture right separated the serious cook from everyone else. Too much stirring and the praline turned dry, too little, and it pooled flat and never set. What everyone agreed on was the pecan. A praline without one was just a sugar disc. The nut gave it the crunch against the smooth, the salt against the sweet, the whole reason to make it from scratch. Number 9. Marzipan fruits. Ground almonds, sugar, and egg white pressed into a paste and shaped by hand into miniature peaches, apples, bananas, pears, and strawberries. Then you painted them with food coloring to match the real thing. A finished tray looked like a doll-sized farmer's market. Peaches got a blush of red over yellow. Bananas got a streak of brown at the tip. Strawberries got tiny black dots pressed in with a toothpick for seeds. Making them required the patience of a painter and the fingers of a jeweler. Mothers and daughters sat at the kitchen table for hours, shaping and coloring and lining each piece in a row. Candy making and craft project in the same afternoon, and the results were almost too beautiful to eat. Number 8. Apricot coconut balls. Dried apricots ground through a meat grinder, mixed with shredded coconut and sweetened condensed milk, rolled into small balls, and coated in powdered sugar. No cooking required. You could make a full batch in 15 minutes with a child standing on a stool beside you, licking condensed milk off the spoon the entire time. The apricot gave the candy a tartness that cut clean through the sugar, and the coconut gave it a texture that held together without crumbling. They looked like small snowballs on a plate, and they tasted like something from a department store candy counter. Women brought these to potlucks because they traveled without falling apart and never needed to be kept cold. They lasted for weeks in a tin and got chewier as the days passed, which somehow made them better. The recipe showed up in church cookbooks from coast to coast, always credited to someone's aunt, never to the same one twice. Number 7. Opera creams. A candy born in Cincinnati that traveled through church kitchens across Ohio and never quite left. Sugar, cream, butter, and vanilla cooked together to soft ball stage, then poured onto a marble slab and worked back and forth with a scraper until the whole mass turned from glossy to smooth white. You cut the cream into small squares, and from there each kitchen had its own ending. Some dipped every piece in melted chocolate. Others left them bare with a dusting of powdered sugar, or pressed a walnut half into the top while the candy was still soft. The name went back to opera houses, where they sold these during intermission because you could eat one in a single bite without making a mess of your gloves. Opera creams separated the patient cooks from the ones who wanted results in a hurry. You could not rush the cooling or the working. If you pulled the batch off the slab too early, it stayed runny. and if you overworked it, the texture turned chalky and dry. The women who made them, made them the same way every time, and they never wrote the method down because their hands already knew every step. Number 6. Brown sugar taffy. Brown sugar, butter, and a splash of vinegar, boiled and pulled until it turned golden and firm. The flavor landed somewhere between butterscotch and caramel, with a chewiness that made your jaw work for every bite. Taffy pulling was a social event. Families stood in the kitchen pulling ropes of warm candy back and forth, stretching them long, folding them over, stretching again. The more you pulled, the lighter the color and the smoother the texture. Children got the short end of the rope. Adults got the long end and pretended the children were doing all the real work. When the taffy held its shape, you twisted it into a rope, cut it with scissors, and wrapped each piece in wax paper before it stuck to itself. Number 5. Peanut butter pinwheels. Fondant rolled flat, spread with a thick layer of peanut butter, and rolled into a tight log. Then you chilled it, sliced it into rounds, and each cross-section revealed a white spiral curled around a tan center. The visual was half the appeal. They looked like something from a candy counter, but they came from a kitchen with a rolling pin and a jar of peanut butter. The fondant was sweet and smooth. The peanut butter was salty and dense. Together, they covered every corner of your mouth at once. Some women tinted the fondant pink or green for the holidays. The pinwheel shape held up for days in a tin, making them ideal for gift boxes. Simple to make, hard to stop eating, and impossible to find anywhere today. Number 4. Anise hard candy. Sugar, corn syrup, water, and a few drops of anise oil. You boiled the sugar to hard crack, stirred in the anise and a drop of red food coloring, and poured the molten syrup into small molds or dropped it by the spoonful onto a greased surface. Each piece cooled into a small, jewel-colored disc that tasted like black licorice with a clean sugar finish. Old-timers carried these in their pockets the way other people carried mints. The flavor was strong enough that one piece lasted half an hour, and the smell followed you through the room. Anise was a love or hate proposition, and the people who loved it were loyal beyond reason. Italian and German families made these by the jarful, and the jar was never empty for long. Number 3. Fruit jellies. Fruit juice, sugar, and powdered pectin cooked down and poured into a shallow pan. You let the slab set overnight, cut it into cubes the next morning with a wet knife, and rolled each cube in granulated sugar. The result looked like gemstones spread across a cutting board. Grape juice made deep purple squares. Apple made pale gold. Strawberry made a pink so bright it looked artificial, even though every drop came from a real berry, boiled and strained through cheesecloth that afternoon. The texture landed between a gumdrop and a firm jam, soft enough to give under your teeth, but solid enough to hold its shape in a holiday tin for days. French confectioners called them pâtés de fruits and charged a small fortune for a box. American women in the 1950s made them from backyard fruit and a package of pectin and called them nothing fancier than fruit jellies. The sugar coating kept them from sticking together, and every color tasted different enough to make you reach for the next one. Number 2. Needhams. A mashed potato mixed with powdered sugar and shredded coconut, shaped into bars, and dipped in chocolate. Most people hearing it for the first time cannot believe a potato belongs in candy. But it does. The potato vanished entirely into the sugar and coconut. You could not taste it, could not find it, could not tell it was there. What it did was give the filling a smooth, dense body that powdered sugar alone could never achieve. In Maine, Needhams were named after a traveling evangelist popular in the late 1800s, and the candy became a regional staple that lasted well past the 1950s. One leftover baked potato produced enough filling to cover a baking sheet. Cheap, surprising, and baffling to anyone who had never watched it made. Number 1. Honey nougat. Honey, sugar, egg whites, and almonds. You beat the egg whites stiff, boiled honey and sugar together until they reached hard ball, and poured the hot syrup into the whites while the mixer ran at full speed. The mixture doubled in size, turned bone white, and became a dense, sticky mass that fought the spoon with everything it had. You folded in toasted almonds by hand, pressed the nougat between two sheets of edible wafer paper, weighed it down with a cutting board, and waited. When you cut through the slab the next morning, the nougat stretched slightly before it gave, and each slice showed almonds suspended in the white-like stones set in plaster. This candy came to America with Italian and Spanish families who made it for feast days. Communities in Brooklyn, New Orleans, and San Francisco kept the tradition through the 1950s, pressing heavy boards onto kitchen table slabs every December. No candy on this list required more work. You boiled, you beat, you folded, you pressed, you waited through the night, and none rewarded the effort more generously. Number 15. Coconut candy balls. Sweetened shredded coconut was one of the few exotic ingredients available in rural general stores by the late 1950s, and women across the Ozarks of Missouri and Arkansas learned quickly that a can of sweetened condensed milk, a bag of coconut, a handful of powdered sugar, and a few drops of vanilla made a candy that required no cooking at all. You mixed the coconut and sweetened milk until it would hold a shape, rolled it into small balls, and set them on waxed paper to firm. Some women dipped them in melted chocolate. Some rolled them in more coconut. Some left them plain. In the Baptist church communities of the Arkansas Hill Country, these appeared on every covered dish table during the Christmas season. A can of sweetened condensed milk cost about 25 cents in 1961. That single can made 3 to 4 dozen pieces. That is a Christmas plate for under $1. Opera creams were the chocolate-covered fondant candies melting into silky pools of sweetness, their centers impossibly smooth compared to grainy homemade fudge. Making proper fondant required cooking sugar syrup to soft ball stage, then working it on marble slabs until it transformed from clear liquid to opaque white paste through a process called turning. This technique demanded patience and strong arms, as syrup had to be worked continuously until crystallization created that characteristic smoothness. The fondant was flavored with vanilla, maple, or fruit extracts, then shaped into ovals and dipped in tempered chocolate. The name suggested elegance, and these candies appeared in the finest holiday assortments. Department store candy counters sold them by the pound, but homemade versions carried special pride. Mothers who mastered fondant guarded their techniques, knowing improper crystallization produced grainy results. Children considered opera creams the sophisticated candy, something grown up compared to simpler treats. Number 23. Chocolate drops. There was no Hershey's in most rural Appalachian kitchens, but there was cocoa powder, and cocoa powder was enough. A woman in Harlan County would measure out 2 tablespoons of cocoa, combine it with sugar, a small knob of butter, and a splash of milk, bring the whole thing to a boil, then drop it by spoonfuls onto wax paper. She didn't call it fudge. She called it chocolate candy, and she made it in under 15 minutes on top of the stove. A tin of cocoa powder cost about 30 cents in 1961, enough for 3 or 4 batches of drops, no oven, no fancy equipment, just a pot, a spoon, and enough confidence to know when the mixture was ready by the way it smelled. In mill communities across the Piedmont of North Carolina, this same method produced peanut butter drops by swapping out cocoa for peanut butter. Your grandmother did not need 2 recipes. She needed 1 pot and whatever was in the cabinet. Penuche fudge was the brown sugar cousin of traditional chocolate fudge, its name derived from Mexican Spanish for raw sugar and flavor reminiscent of pralines and caramel. Unlike chocolate fudge masking imperfect technique with strong cocoa, Penuche demanded precision since delicate brown sugar and butter revealed every mistake in temperature or timing. The candy required cooking brown sugar, butter, and milk to soft ball stage, then beating until the mixture thickened and lost its gloss, transformation happening suddenly, requiring immediate pouring before fudge seized. The finished candy had maple-like sweetness with butterscotch undertones, often studded with pecans complementing caramelized depth. Southern and Midwestern families cherished Penuche, considering chocolate fudge common, while Penuche demonstrated real skill. Church bake sales and holiday gift boxes featured this confection prominently. Penuche has largely disappeared from Christmas selections, overshadowed by chocolate varieties forgiving imperfect execution. Maraschino cherry fudge was the Christmas candy that looked like it belonged in a stained glass window thanks to those bright red cherry pieces inside every square. You saw it at potlucks and family gatherings, always stealing attention from the cookies around it. Making it started with warming condensed milk with chocolate until thick and glossy, and then came the cherries. Someone would chop them into tiny pieces, their syrup staining cutting boards and fingertips alike. When stirred in, the fudge turned swirled and festive, bubbling softly as it thickened. Once cooled, it formed creamy slices that tasted cheerful and sweet in a way modern desserts rarely do. People stopped making it because trends changed and polished desserts took over, but this fudge had personality. It was bold, bright, messy, and joyful, and every bite tasted like childhood Christmas. Number 18. Vinegar taffy. The first time someone describes vinegar taffy to a person who has never eaten it, the reaction is usually a look. Vinegar. In candy. But cider vinegar was the acid that balanced the sweetness in old-fashioned taffy when cream of tartar wasn't available, and the result was a candy with a clean, bright flavor that tasted like something between butterscotch and lemon drops. Apple cider vinegar cost about 12 cents a quart in rural Virginia in 1963. The taffy was pulled by hand, one person, two hands, stretched and folded over and over until it lightened in color and turned glossy. In farm communities across the Shenandoah Valley and the Blue Ridge foothills, taffy pulling was a social event. Young people gathered on Saturday evenings, somebody cooked the candy, and the pulling happened with enough noise to keep the house warm. Nobody had to explain the recipe. Everybody already knew it. That is what tradition means. Homemade chocolate-covered cherries required patience since the liquid center making them special developed only after weeks of waiting. The process began with maraschino cherries drained and patted dry, then wrapped in fondant that would eventually liquefy around the fruit. Each wrapped cherry was dipped in tempered chocolate and set aside in cool storage, where enzymes in cherry juice slowly broke down fondant into sweet syrup. Opening one too early meant biting into solid fondant, but waiting 3 weeks rewarded patience with that magical burst of cherry-flavored liquid inside chocolate shells. Grandmothers started these in early December so they'd be ready for Christmas gift boxes. The chocolate coating had to be thick enough to contain liquid without cracking, requiring proper tempering, producing glossy shells with satisfying snap. Children learned not to bite these over good clothing since liquid centers squirted unexpectedly. These homemade versions bore little resemblance to commercial chocolate-covered cherries. Vinegar taffy confused people until they tasted it, and then the flavor clicked instantly. The vinegar was never meant to make it sour. It simply balanced the sweetness and added a subtle tang that older generations loved. Before flavored extracts became common, families relied on pantry staples, and vinegar was one of the few ingredients that transformed sugar without overpowering it. You heated the mixture, added that splash of vinegar, and waited for it to reach the perfect stage. Once cool enough, families pulled the taffy until it grew pale and glossy. Some added vanilla or lemon when they had it, but the flavor was always unmistakably simple and comforting. Vinegar taffy faded away as modern candy aisles became filled with bold colors and loud flavors, but this candy belonged to a quieter Christmas. It tasted like resourcefulness and tradition wrapped in sweetness. Number 16. Peanut butter no-bake cookies. In communities where firewood was scarce or the summer heat made the kitchen unbearable, no-bake cookies weren't a shortcut. They were a solution. The base recipe, sugar, cocoa, butter, and milk boiled together, then stirred into oats and peanut butter and dropped by spoonfuls onto wax paper, was common in coal mining families across West Virginia, Kentucky, and western Pennsylvania from the 1950s onward. You didn't need a working oven. You didn't need baking powder or eggs. You needed a single pot and about 10 minutes. Women who worked double shifts at textile mills in the Piedmont kept the ingredients ready so they could make them in the time between coming home and putting the children to bed. No bake, no wait, no oven required. Hard candy Christmas shapes transformed ordinary sugar into edible ornaments, doubling as tree decorations and stocking stuffers. Candy makers heated sugar and corn syrup to hard crack stage, quickly pouring molten liquid into metal molds shaped like Santa faces, Christmas trees, bells, and snowflakes. Working speed mattered since syrup hardened within minutes. Colored oils added at precise moments for even distribution without clouding transparency. The finished candies were crystal clear or jewel-toned, threaded with ribbon loops so children could hang them on tree branches alongside glass ornaments. Grandmothers collected brass and copper molds over decades, candy-making equipment becoming family heirlooms passed down with recipes. Flavors ran from peppermint and cinnamon to clove and anise. Each color matched to specific tastes, so children learned what to expect. Making hard candy required marble slabs, brass molds, and confidence handling extremely hot sugar, barriers eventually shifting candy towards store-bought alternatives. Peppermint stick bark looked like Christmas had shattered into little edible pieces, and for years it was one of the easiest candies families made. Before bark became polished and commercial, it was something homemade and joyfully messy. Someone would crush peppermint sticks inside a towel with a rolling pin, filling the room with the scent of mint. Then white chocolate was melted slowly on the stove, stirred until smooth, and mixed with those peppermint shards until the whole pot sparkled. Spread on a baking sheet and cooled, it broke into uneven pieces that tasted crisp and wintry. Children loved the crunch, adults loved the nostalgia, and everyone loved how something so simple felt so festive. Store-bought bark exists now, but homemade versions had charm in their imperfections. It was a reminder that Christmas candy did not need to be fancy. It just needed someone willing to make a sweet little mess in the kitchen. Number 20. Circus peanuts. Before dollar stores, there was the general store jar. In rural communities across the Midwest, small towns in Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois, circus peanuts sat in glass jars on the counter of the dry goods store. Orange, banana-flavored, shaped like a peanut but made from nothing a peanut ever touched. They were sold by the piece at about 1 cent each through most of the 1950s and 1960s. Children who grew up in those communities remember them as the candy you got when you had only a penny and couldn't decide. Adults who grew up eating them either love them fiercely or find them baffling. There is no middle ground. The banana flavor came from an artificial extract that was the same formula used in banana-flavored medicine. They were simple. They were cheap. They were everywhere. That was enough. Seafoam candy carried the same ethereal texture as Divinity, but traded egg whites for brown sugar, creating confection the color of beach sand with butterscotch and molasses flavor. The technique required cooking brown sugar and corn syrup to precisely 260 degrees before pouring over beaten egg whites and whipping until the candy achieved its signature airy texture. Unlike Divinity's pure white appearance, Seafoam had amber hue deepening as it aged, and caramelized sugar notes made it more complex on the palate. Appalachian families particularly treasured this candy, passing recipes through generations alongside stories of Christmas gatherings where seafoam appeared on pressed glass plates. The name evoked something delicate and natural, though the candy required industrial-strength arm muscles before electric mixers became common. Children loved seafoam because it melted on the tongue, unlike hard candies lasting forever. This candy has nearly vanished from modern traditions, replaced by commercial confections lacking handmade charm. Coconut haystacks were one of the simplest Christmas candies ever created, but they tasted like 100 tiny holiday miracles stacked together. Made from shredded coconut mixed with warm sugar syrup, they were the candy equivalent of childhood scribbles, messy, uneven, and absolutely perfect. Mothers loved how easy they were to prepare when time and ingredients were limited, and children loved how they looked like little snowy mounds waiting to be snatched from the tray. You just heated the syrup, stirred in the coconut until every strand glistened, and dropped spoonfuls onto wax paper to set. No tricks, no thermometers, no weather conditions required. Despite their simplicity, haystacks carried the same excitement as more complicated candies because they tasted like pure sweetness and holiday energy. They were popular across the country, especially in homes where budgets were tight and store-bought treats were luxuries. Over time, they faded from Christmas tables as more elaborate desserts took their place, but older generations still talk about them with the same affection as childhood toys and snowy mornings. Coconut haystacks captured the heart of homemade Christmas candy. Cheap, cheerful, and made with love instead of precision. Number 17. Buckeyes. Named for the nut of the Ohio state tree, Buckeyes are chocolate-dipped peanut butter balls that became a Midwest tradition starting in the early 1960s. The original version used nothing more than peanut butter, powdered sugar, and a little butter worked into a dough, rolled into balls, and dipped partially in melted chocolate so that a circle of the peanut butter filling showed at the top, just like the real Buckeye nut. Home economists in Columbus and Dayton documented the candy in church cookbooks as early as 1960. A pound of peanut butter cost about 35 cents. A bag of chocolate chips added another 20 cents. The whole batch made 40 to 50 pieces. That is candy for a family of 6 for under 60 cents, and it looked like something that took far more effort than it did. That gap between how hard it looked and how easy it was is something your grandmother understood very well. Molasses taffy was the Christmas candy turning candy, making into community entertainment, requiring multiple people to pull sticky ropes until they transformed from dark brown to golden tan. The base recipe combined molasses, sugar, butter, and vinegar, cooked until a drop formed hard ball in cold water, then poured onto buttered marble slabs to cool. Once reaching pulling temperature, greased hands stretched it into long ropes, folded back, and stretched again. Repeated dozens of times until the candy lightened and developed characteristic chewy texture. Families made taffy pulling into social occasions, inviting neighbors for evenings combining work with laughter. Children earned their share by helping pull, learning that timing mattered since taffy cooled too much became impossible to stretch. The finished candy was twisted into ropes and snipped with scissors into bite-sized pieces wrapped in waxed paper. The flavor was deep and complex, molasses providing earthiness that modern corn syrup taffies cannot match. Molasses pull taffy was the kind of candy that transformed the entire household into willing labor because making it took more hands than one person wanted to admit. It began with molasses bubbling on the stove until the kitchen smelled like warm sugar and winter spices. But once it was poured onto a buttered tray, the real chaos began. Children would appear instantly, hands already buttered, ready to pull the taffy even if they had ignored every other chore that day. You stretched the warm rope over and over, folding and twisting it until it lightened into a golden striped ribbon. The room filled with laughter, complaints, and the occasional sticky disaster when someone lost their grip. Long strands were draped over chairs to cool, and the whole house smelled like homemade sweetness. People do not make pull taffy anymore because it takes time, energy, and strong wrists, but older generations still remember it as one of the last truly hands-on Christmas candies, the kind that tasted like effort and family. Number 24. Caramel corn. On farm kitchens across southern Ohio and northern Kentucky, popcorn was the one crop that always came through. A family could grow a single row and have enough to pop all winter. The caramel that went over it was made in the same heavy pot used for everything else: sugar, sorghum, or molasses, a spoon of butter, a pinch of salt. Cooked to the hard crack stage, poured over a pan of popped corn, and spread out to cool on greased butcher paper. The whole batch cost less than 15 cents in 1963. What made it special wasn't the recipe. Every family had the same recipe. What made it special was the night it got made, usually a cold night, usually a Friday, usually with the radio going and children underfoot. Farm families in the Hocking Hills of Ohio and the hill country of eastern Kentucky shaped the same mixture into popcorn balls, wrapped them in waxed paper, and set them in a row on the windowsill like little amber moons. Candied citrus peel transformed what most families threw away into glistening confections, elevating Christmas baking and candy dishes. The process began with thick-skinned oranges, lemons, or grapefruits, whose peels were cut into strips and boiled repeatedly to remove bitterness before simmering in sugar syrup until translucent. The softened peels were rolled in granulated sugar and dried on racks, emerging as chewy sweet treats with intense citrus flavor and slight bitter edge sophisticated palates appreciated. Frugal housewives loved this candy because it cost almost nothing, using peels that would otherwise go to waste while producing something impressive. The finished candied peel appeared in fruitcakes, on cookie platters, and dipped in dark chocolate for elegant gifts. Children often found the flavor too intense, but adults savored complexity, separating homemade from artificially colored commercial versions. Some families candied citrus from backyard trees, making this confection celebration of harvest and thrift. Hardtack. Christmas candy was the sparkling jewel of holiday tables, especially in the mid-20th century when homemade candies meant more than anything wrapped in foil. The process looked almost like magic to children. You heated sugar, water, and corn syrup until the mixture turned clear and glass-like, then added bright colors and simple flavors that filled the house with scents of cinnamon, clove, or wintergreen. Once the syrup reached that boiling point of no return, you poured it onto a buttered pan and waited for it to cool just long enough to cut. But here was the part that made it special. You dusted the finished cubes in powdered sugar so they would not stick together, and suddenly you had a bowl full of tiny stained glass windows that seemed too pretty to eat. Hardtack candy became a symbol of the season because it was cheap, cheerful, and long-lasting. It sat in candy dishes for weeks, ready for guests, children, or whoever wandered by. You rarely see people making it today because it requires patience, precision, and a certain tolerance for sticky countertops. Candy stores still sell versions of it, but the homemade kind had a subtle warmth, a simpler sweetness, and a charm that commercial versions cannot imitate. Hardtack was the kind of candy you remembered long after the tree came down, partly for its taste and partly for how it made the season feel fuller. Number 13. Sugared pecans. In the pecan belt, central Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, the eastern edge of Texas, a woman with a pecan tree in her yard could make candy for almost nothing. She beat an egg white until foamy, tossed pecan halves in it, then tumbled them in a mixture of sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of salt. She spread them on a greased baking sheet and put them in a slow oven until the coating baked hard and glossy. The pecans cost nothing. The egg was from the yard chickens. A cup of sugar in 1963 cost about a nickel. A full pan of sugared pecans, enough to fill a tin box, cost about 20 cents to make. In rural South Georgia, families with trees put up 3 or 4 tins every December, one for the house and the rest to take to neighbors, to the church, to elderly women who could not get out. The gift was not extravagant. It fit inside the economy of a community that gave what it had. Sponge candy was the honeycomb confection that shattered between teeth with satisfying crunch before dissolving into pure caramelized sweetness on the tongue. Making it required cooking sugar and corn syrup with baking soda added at precisely the right moment, causing the mixture to foam dramatically and triple in volume within seconds. The timing was everything. Pour too early and the candy stayed flat, pour too late and the foam collapsed into dense toffee. The finished sponge had thousands of tiny air pockets creating its signature texture, golden brown and impossibly light despite being solid sugar. Buffalo, New York claimed this candy as regional specialty, but homemade versions appeared in Christmas tins across the Midwest. Children loved breaking apart large slabs into irregular chunks, each piece revealing those honeycomb interiors. The candy absorbed moisture quickly, requiring airtight storage and eating within days. Chocolate-dipped sponge candy became holiday tradition, bitter cocoa contrasting with airy sweetness. Peanut brittle was one of those candies that made a whole neighborhood smell like Christmas the moment someone poured that molten sugar onto a buttered pan. You could hear it before you saw it too, that sharp crack when someone tapped it with the back of a spoon to test if it had cooled. Back then, making peanut brittle was basically a holiday event that pulled the whole family into the kitchen whether they planned to help or not. You had to stir that sugar mixture until it turned golden, hoping it did not scorch and ruin the whole batch. The moment you added baking soda, the pot foamed up like a messy science experiment, and everyone either cheered or jumped back a little. Then came the race to spread it thin before it hardened. Some people used wooden spoons, others used their hands wrapped in buttered paper, and some just relied on experience. Once cooled, it cracked into glassy sheets filled with roasted peanuts that always tasted better in December. Store-bought versions exist, but none compared to the loud, sweet, handmade brittle that defined old Christmas kitchens. Number 22. Molasses popcorn balls. Separate from plain caramel corn, molasses popcorn balls were a late fall tradition across the southern Piedmont and the hill country of Tennessee. After the sorghum press ran and the molasses came in, the first thing many children asked for was a popcorn ball. The molasses gave it a darker, earthier sweetness than plain sugar, heavier, more complex, with a faint tang that no modern candy can copy. You popped the corn first, made the molasses coating, and poured it over the top. You had to work fast because molasses sets quickly. You greased your hands with butter and shaped the balls while the mixture was still warm enough to move. Small hands burned sometimes. A gallon of sorghum molasses in central Tennessee in 1962 sold for about $1.25. That gallon made enough popcorn balls to fill a wash basin. That was the whole point. Divinity was the cloud-white confection separating serious candy makers from casual cooks, requiring perfect timing and dry weather to succeed. The recipe seemed simple: sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites, but execution demanded beating hot syrup into stiff peaks until the mixture lost its glossiness and held shape when dropped from a spoon. Southern grandmothers swore Divinity would fail on rainy days when humidity prevented proper setting, making Christmas candy weather-dependent ritual. The finished pieces were dropped onto waxed paper in soft mounds studded with pecans, their texture somewhere between marshmallow and meringue with a slight crumble dissolving on the tongue. Children watched the transformation with wonder as clear syrup became billowing white clouds, beaters leaving trails holding shape like mountain peaks. Divinity appeared on Christmas cookie platters alongside fudge and pralines, its pristine whiteness contrasting darker confections. The candy required immediate consumption since it absorbed moisture quickly. Buttermilk pralines were the kind of Southern Christmas candy that tasted like a warm porch swing, a family story passed down, and pure holiday comfort all wrapped into one sugary mound. The recipe looked simple on paper, but anyone who tried making pralines without supervision quickly learned that simplicity was a lie. You had to cook the mixture low and slow, letting the buttermilk, sugar, and butter bubble together until they reached a color that older cooks called just right. No thermometer could tell you that shade, only experience could. Once the pecans were stirred in, the mixture thickened into something rich and creamy, and you had to work fast before it hardened in the pot. People would drop spoonfuls onto wax paper, the pralines spreading slightly as they cooled into little caramel-colored discs with craggy tops. They tasted like brown sugar, toasted nuts, and holidays spent with people who knew how to make something out of nothing. Modern pralines exist in stores now, but they are smooth, tidy, and missing that old-fashioned soul. Buttermilk pralines had personality because the buttermilk added a tangy depth that made them memorable. Older generations made them every December, sometimes as gifts, sometimes for family, and sometimes just because the weather felt right. Over the years, people stopped making them, partly because the process took time and partly because the candy industry swallowed everything homemade. But anyone who has tasted a real buttermilk praline knows why they were worth the trouble. Each bite tasted like memory, patience, and the quiet pride of creating something special without needing anything fancy. Number 21. Buttermilk candy. Not many people have heard of buttermilk candy outside the rural South, but in the farm communities of central Georgia and the flatlands of West Tennessee, it was on the Christmas plate every single year. It starts like fudge, sugar, butter, and heat, but the buttermilk changes everything. The acid reacts with baking soda and creates a candy that is lightly tan, almost caramel-colored, with a faint sourness underneath the sweetness. It tastes like nothing else. Grandmothers in those communities described it as what fudge would taste like if fudge had a little more character. A cup of buttermilk cost almost nothing. A woman who kept a milk cow had buttermilk every day for free. This was the candy she made when she wanted something that tasted like home. Your grandmother knew what she was doing when she made it. Pulled butter mints were pastel confections appearing at every church social, wedding reception, and Christmas open house throughout the 1960s and 70s. The recipe combined butter, powdered sugar, and peppermint extract into fondant-like mixture kneaded until smooth, then pulled and twisted into small pillow shapes. Unlike hard peppermints lasting forever, these dissolved almost instantly on the tongue, leaving creamy butter flavor with bright mint finish. Ladies' circles and church auxiliaries organized mint-making sessions where women gathered around tables, fingers coated in powdered sugar, as they shaped hundreds of pieces. The finished mints were dyed pale pink, green, or yellow, matching holiday schemes, arranged on crystal plates with paper doilies. Children helping received broken pieces as rewards, learning even imperfect mints tasted wonderful. These required no cooking, making them accessible to anyone with patience for kneading. Today's commercial butter mints approximate texture but lack fresh peppermint intensity. Potato candy rolls were the kind of Christmas treat that made people raise an eyebrow until they tasted one, and then suddenly they wanted the recipe like it was magic. These candies came from a time when nothing went to waste, not even leftover mashed potatoes. Mothers mixed those cold potatoes with powdered sugar until a dough formed, something that amazed every child watching. After rolling it flat, they spread peanut butter on top and rolled it into a tight log. Sliced into spirals, each piece looked like a fancy cookie, even though it was made from the humblest ingredients. Children loved them, adults appreciated them, and they were perfect when budgets were tight, but spirits were high. Today, people turn their noses up at the idea, forgetting what creativity and resourcefulness can taste like. But anyone who grew up with those sweet little spirals knows they had a charm no store-bought candy could ever match. Number 25. Homemade lollipops. When a child in a coal camp in McDowell County, West Virginia wanted candy and there was no penny store within walking distance, a grandmother sometimes made lollipops on the kitchen stove. She boiled sugar, a splash of water, and a drop of extract, peppermint if she had it, vanilla if she didn't, until the syrup went clear as glass. She poured it into greased bottle caps and pressed a toothpick into each one before it set. These weren't pretty. The color was amber or pale yellow. The shape was uneven, but they were sweet, and they were yours. Sugar cost about a dime a pound in 1962 in rural West Virginia. A batch of a dozen lollipops cost almost nothing. Children saved the sticks and compared them the way other kids compared baseball cards. No store-bought candy bar needed, no wrapper to throw away, just a hard knot of sweetness on a stick that lasted all the way home from school. Horehound drops were the bittersweet medicine candy that older generations enjoyed. Despite children's protests, they tasted like cough syrup mixed with dirt. The herb horehound grew wild in American gardens, and frugal housewives harvested it to brew into strong tea, forming the base for these hard candies. The finished drops had intensely herbal flavor, bitter, slightly minty, medicinally sharp, supposedly soothing sore throats during winter. Older folks kept horehound drops in pockets throughout holiday season, offering them to grandchildren who quickly learned to refuse politely. The candy represented an older approach where sweetness served as delivery system for herbal benefits rather than existing purely for pleasure. Pharmacies stocked horehound drops alongside penny candies, though children spent coins on sweeter options. By the 1970s, these drops were already nostalgic relics purchased by those remembering them from childhood. Today they appear occasionally in specialty shops, curiosities from when candy and medicine overlapped. Number 19. Sorghum balls. In the hills of eastern Kentucky and the mountain communities of southwestern Virginia, a candy was made that required no stove and no heat. You measured out sorghum molasses and peanut butter in equal parts, worked in enough powdered sugar to make the mixture firm, and rolled it between your palms into small balls. Then you rolled those balls in cocoa or crushed peanuts or powdered sugar and set them on a plate in the cold pantry to firm up. That was the candy. Sorghum was the sweetener mountain families had when money ran out or the store was too far. A family with a half-acre of cane and access to a community press could make enough molasses to sweeten every dish all winter. The sorghum ball was the candy that required nothing from a store. In Letcher County, children gathered around a wooden table on cold December afternoons and rolled them by the dozens. No stove required, no pots to wash. Marzipan fruits were the edible art projects transforming almond paste into miniature apples, oranges, and bananas almost too beautiful to eat. The process began with grinding blanched almonds into smooth paste, then kneading in powdered sugar until the mixture became pliable clay. Skilled hands shaped this paste into tiny fruits, each requiring attention to realistic proportions and color gradations. Food coloring was applied with brushes and sponges, building layers of red over yellow for apples, orange fading to green for citrus. Stems were crafted from cloves or chocolate, and some makers added texture by pressing real fruit skins against the surface. These confections appeared in fancy candy boxes and on holiday dessert tables displayed like jewels. Children often refused to eat them, preferring to keep tiny fruits as decorations. European immigrants brought marzipan traditions that American families adapted with whatever colorings they found. The skill required meant fewer families attempted them each generation. Number 14. Candied apples. Before candy apples became a county fair novelty, they were a late autumn treat in farm communities across the South and Midwest, made with apples too small or too tart to eat fresh. A woman in a Tennessee Valley community would take the seconds from the apple harvest, the knobby ones, the ones with soft spots cut out, skewer them on sticks from the woodpile, and dip them in sugar syrup cooked with a handful of Red Hots for color. Red Hots had been sold at general stores in bulk since the 1930s, just a few cents a handful. The apples were free. In farm communities across Appalachia where orchards were plentiful, this was the candy that appeared in late September when the apples came down and the first cold air arrived. Children ate them standing in the yard. The syrup cracked when you bit in. The apple underneath was tart. You ate it down to the core and chewed on the stick. Burnt sugar candy carried the deep amber color and complex bittersweet flavor of caramelization pushed to its limits, a confection requiring nerve and precise timing. The recipe involved nothing but sugar and water, cooked until the mixture passed through golden to amber, to the edge of burnt without crossing into bitterness. This transformation happened in seconds, and candy makers learned to pull pots from heat at exactly the right moment based on color and smell alone. The molten caramel was poured into buttered molds or dropped onto slabs in free-form puddles, hardening into glassy discs. The flavor was intensely concentrated, not merely sweet but complex with notes of smoke and molasses that lingered. Some families added cream at the last moment to create softer caramels, while purists preferred hard crack version. Children found burnt sugar candy too intense, but adults appreciated its sophistication. This was Christmas candy for grown-up palates, often served with coffee after holiday dinners. Number 12. Ribbon candy. Ribbon candy wasn't made at home. It was the candy you found in the glass jar at the general store, usually around Christmas, always the same. Thin, flat strips of hard sugar candy folded back on themselves in long curves, striped in red and white or green and white. In rural communities across Appalachia and the rural Midwest, the general store jar of ribbon candy was the first sign that Christmas was coming. A penny bought a single piece. A nickel bought 5. Children pressed their faces to the glass counter and pointed. Clay's Candy in South Bend, Indiana made ribbon candy through the entire 1960s using the same hard crack sugar process. In the coalfield communities of southwestern Virginia, women remember bringing ribbon candy to school parties in waxed paper bags, each piece chosen carefully because the colors mattered and the shapes were beautiful, and sometimes that was the only beautiful thing on the table. 30 candies, all from the same era, all made with ingredients sitting on any grocery store shelf today. The stoves still work, the recipes never changed. The only thing missing is the afternoon. Pick one from this list and make it this weekend. And if this brought back a memory of pulling taffy in your mother's kitchen or watching Divinity set on a December afternoon, hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Until next time.